She was just 12 years old. He was a single father with nothing left to give. And the woman they saved was a billionaire who had secretly given up on life. But no one expected the words that came next. Words that would bring them all to tears and change everything. If stories of quiet courage and unexpected miracles move your heart, you're in the right place. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter of what comes next. Now, let me take you back to the moment it all began. Vivian Blake had built empires from silence. She was a woman who walked into boardrooms like they were battlegrounds and left with contracts, signed hearts steeled, and competitors wondering what kind of fire powered her calm. The name Vivian Blake stood for brilliance, control, and more than anything else, distance. But on Flight 417 from Dallas to New York, cruising at 38,000 feet, the woman known for conquering the tech world without flinching took a single, trembling breath, then collapsed. It started with a faint twitch of her fingers, an odd heaviness in her chest she'd dismissed as altitude fatigue. Then the world tilted. Glass shattered inside her lungs. Her eyes rolled back. The silence that followed was deafening. Passengers gasped. A flight attendant screamed for a medic. A man in a suit dropped his drink. First class wasn't used to chaos, but in 14B, chaos had arrived. 2 rows back, a 12-year-old girl in a faded pink hoodie sat rigid, her hands clutching a dog-eared Bible. Her name was Maya. She didn't blink. She didn't ask. She moved. She unbuckled, shoved past a frozen businessman, and knelt beside the collapsed woman. "She's not breathing," Maya said, voice steady but urgent. "She's not breathing." "What is she doing?" someone whispered. "Where's her mother?" Maya ignored them. She tilted Vivian's chin, checked her airway, like she'd been taught in a county CPR class 2 months ago. Her small palms hovered, hesitated, then pressed into the woman's chest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She counted aloud, pumping harder than her arms should have allowed. "Stay with me. Please stay." The air thickened with tension. Then another figure dropped beside her. Daniel Walker's calloused hands took over the rhythm Maya had started. His eyes met hers. Steel gray focused the eyes of a man who'd seen death and dared it to come back. "I've got compressions," he said calmly. Maya oxygen mask. She was already grabbing it. Passengers fell into stunned silence. Some recorded, others prayed. Most just watched breathless. Daniel worked quickly, efficiently. His mind flipped through emergency response protocols like a long-forgotten manual reawakened by muscle memory. Once long ago, he'd been the man strangers called in crisis. Once he had a badge, a fire station, a crew that trusted him with their lives. That was before the accident, before the screaming metal, before the silence of a child's empty car seat. Now he only answered when Maya called. Vivian's body jerked under a final set of compressions. A gasp clawed its way up her throat. Her chest rose, her eyelids fluttered. "She's breathing," Daniel whispered. Maya let out a sob, but quickly muffled it. She wasn't the crying type, at least not when anyone was watching. Daniel checked Vivian's pulse, faint but there. "She'd live," the captain's voice came overhead. "We're diverting to Nashville for emergency medical assistance. Please remain seated." Daniel looked at Maya. "You okay, Peanut?" She nodded, then reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out something small, a wooden cross no longer than a paperclip, smoothed by time and touch. "She dropped this," Maya said softly, placing it next to Vivian's hand. "I think she needs it more than I do right now." Daniel stared at the girl who had once been a stranger in a case file, the girl who had refused to speak for 2 months after being found abandoned behind a church, the girl who now sat, still, steady, as if she had done nothing more extraordinary than hand someone a bottle of water. That girl had just saved a billionaire's life. In the terminal at Nashville's airport, while paramedics wheeled Vivian Blake away, Daniel and Maya stood in the shadows near Gate 7. They watched silently. No one asked them questions. No cameras turned their way. The headlines wouldn't include their names. Not yet. But Vivian, through the haze of oxygen and flashing lights, opened her eyes just once and saw them. The man with tired eyes and soldier's shoulders. And the girl? The girl with the cross. Her lips moved just barely. Why? Me and Maya, her voice barely a whisper, answered, because you still have something to do. The motel room smelled faintly of old coffee and air freshener that tried too hard. Daniel Walker had never cared much for comfort, but something about the hum of the ice machine outside room 203 gave him a strange sense of calm. Maya lay asleep on the other bed, curled like a question mark, her hoodie pulled up over her ears. She hadn't said much since they left the hospital in Nashville. She never said much when something stirred too deep to name. Daniel sat by the window, watching the world through a pane of glass smudged with time. His hands were still. His mind was not. He could still feel the weight of Vivian Blake's chest under his palms, still hear the whisper of her breath returning like a forgotten melody, still see the way Maya had moved so sure, so focused, so impossibly small against the vastness of that plain. God, she looked like Lily when she was that age, except Lily had never made it to 12. Daniel pressed his knuckles to his lips hard. The ache wasn't physical. It was memory-shaped. It came from the part of him that still replayed every second of that accident. The rain-slicked road, the deer in the headlights, the flash of fear in his wife's eyes, and the silence that followed. People called it an act of God. Daniel called it his own hands on the wheel. He never forgave himself. And maybe that's why when the social worker called a year later about a girl, no one wanted a girl who hadn't spoken in weeks and had been found behind a church with a note that simply read, "Her name is Maya. Please be kind." He said yes. He hadn't expected her to speak. He hadn't expected her to look at him the way Lily once did. But she had. Eventually. And when she did, it wasn't words she gave him. It was something harder to carry and far more precious. Trust. He glanced back at her now. Even asleep, her fingers were curled around the edge of the blanket like she was bracing for the world to take it away. What kind of child learns to hold on like that? The next morning, they sat in the diner next to the motel. Maya sipped hot chocolate through a chipped ceramic mug while Daniel worked on his second black coffee. She hadn't touched her toast. "You want pancakes?" he asked. She shook her head. "You okay?" She looked up, and for a second, he saw it, that old flicker. The same one from the night she first let him read her notebook. The same one from the plane when she pressed her hands into a stranger's chest and refused to let go. "Do you think she'll remember us?" Maya asked. Daniel blinked. "Who, Vivian Blake?" Maya nodded. Daniel rubbed his jaw. "Hard to say. She barely saw us. She asked, 'Why me?' Maya said, like she thought she didn't deserve to live." There it was again. That quiet intuition Maya had too deep for her years, too true to ignore. "She's been through something," Daniel said carefully. "People don't ask questions like that unless they're carrying something heavy." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Then I used to think that. When Mom left me, I thought maybe I didn't matter enough to stay for." Daniel's breath caught. She had never said that before. He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. "You mattered," he said. "You still matter. More than you know." Maya didn't cry. She never did. Not where people could see. But her hand tightened around his, and in that small motion, 100 unspoken fears were given rest. 2 days later, a knock came at their door. It wasn't press. It wasn't police. It was a man in a dark gray suit with a calm voice and eyes that watched everything. "Mr. Walker?" he asked. Daniel stepped forward warily. "Yeah. My name is Elliot West. I work with Ms. Blake. She asked me to find you." Daniel stiffened. "She okay? She's recovering. And she's curious, grateful. She wants to see you both." Daniel frowned. "Why?" "Because Elliot said," and handed him an envelope with gold lettering. "She believes people don't just walk into your life at random." Inside was a note, handwritten in elegant loops. "Mr. Walker and Maya, you saved my life. I'd like the chance to understand why you were on that flight in that moment when everything broke. If you're willing, I'd like to invite you both to Catskill Ridge for a few days. You'll be safe, quiet, and no one will ask questions you don't want to answer. Vivian Blake." Maya looked up at him, eyes wide. Daniel had sworn he wouldn't get involved, wouldn't let anything tug at the fragile life he'd rebuilt from the wreckage of another. But Maya was already packing, and when she turned to him and said, "Dad, maybe she needs someone the way I needed you," he knew the answer. He nodded. "Let's go see what this is." The private drive wound through thick forest pine needles crunching beneath the tires of Daniel's aging truck. Somewhere beyond the trees, the Catskill Mountains loomed in blue-gray silence, like old sentinels watching the past roll in with every mile. Maya sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands in her lap, clutching the same wooden cross she'd carried on Flight 417. She hadn't spoken much since they'd passed the first security gate. Her eyes, wide and solemn, scanned the tall oaks lining the road like they might speak if she looked hard enough. Daniel glanced over one hand, loosely gripping the wheel. "You nervous?" he asked gently. She shook her head, but her foot bounced against the floorboard in a steady rhythm. He didn't push her. Daniel didn't like places like this. The way money seemed to live in the air, pressing down on everything. He came from dust, steel, and sweat. This place, Vivian Blake's estate, looked like it had never known rust or heartbreak. The main house came into view like a whisper, not a shout, elegant and old, with wide porches, tall windows, and ivy crawling up stone walls, like it had grown there for generations. It looked more like a sanctuary than a fortress, which Daniel suspected was exactly the point. As they pulled to a stop, the front door opened, and Vivian Blake stepped out. She was thinner than Maya remembered, a little paler. Her posture still had that signature steel, but there was something different now. A softness at the corners of her mouth, a slowness in her steps that said, "I've come close to the edge, and I know how far the fall is." Daniel killed the engine. Neither of them moved. Vivian took a few steps forward, then paused. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, voice clear but cautious. Daniel stepped out first. Neither were we. Vivian looked at Maya, who remained in the truck, still holding the cross. "She saved your life," Daniel added, nodding toward his daughter. Vivian smiled faintly. "I know." Still, Maya didn't move. She looked at Vivian for a long beat, then slowly opened the door, stepped down, and walked forward, not like a child meeting someone important, but like someone handing back something they never meant to keep. She held out the wooden cross. "You dropped this on the plane," Maya said simply. "I think it fell from your coat pocket." Vivian blinked. Slowly she extended her hand and accepted it. Her fingers closed around it like it might shatter. "I didn't even know I still had it," she whispered. "It belonged to my mother. I used to keep it close when I traveled, but I haven't thought about it in years." Maya said nothing. She didn't need to. Somehow Vivian seemed to understand. Inside the house was warm in a way that didn't feel staged. A fire crackled in a wide stone hearth, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and cedar. Vivian led them to a sunroom that overlooked a wide, sloping meadow. 3 cups of tea waited on a tray, carefully arranged, like she wasn't used to entertaining but had wanted to try. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into a chair near the window. Daniel remained standing for a beat, then took the seat across from her. Maya sat beside him, her eyes still scanning every corner, like the house might vanish if she blinked too long. "You wanted to ask why we were there?" Daniel said. "Why that moment? Why that flight?" Vivian nodded. "Yes." Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked out at the field beyond the glass, the pale gold of afternoon light stretching across dry grass. 4 years ago, he said quietly, "I was driving through the mountains with my wife and daughter. A deer crossed the road. I swerved. I lost them both." Vivian inhaled sharply. "I left the fire department after that. Couldn't hold a hose without shaking. Couldn't save anyone again. Didn't think I deserved to." He looked at Maya then. "Until her." Vivian turned to Maya. "You adopted her." Daniel nodded. "She was left at a church. No note, no name except what someone overheard the woman who abandoned her say, Maya." Vivian stared at the girl, stunned by the gravity in her eyes. She didn't speak for 2 months, but she carried that cross everywhere. And one day, she brought it to me, held it out like it meant something more than I could understand. He paused, voice growing softer. "And from that day, I started to live again." Vivian swallowed hard. "Why did you agree to come here?" Maya answered this time, her voice clear and even. "Because when you looked at me on the plane, you looked the way my dad did before he chose to stay." That silenced the room. Vivian turned away, blinking fast. For a long time, no one spoke. The fire cracked. A clock ticked softly on the mantel. Then Vivian said, "Would you consider staying here? Not just tonight. Longer. A few days. I don't know what I need to say yet, but I know I don't want you to leave." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You're inviting strangers into your home." Vivian smiled sadly. "No. I'm inviting the people who saved my life." The guest house sat at the edge of the property where the fields bled into the woods, and the sounds of the main house became only whispers. It wasn't large, but it had 2 bedrooms, warm lighting, and windows that let in light from every angle. The kind of place built for privacy, not display. Daniel stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, taking in the details. The furniture was simple but elegant. A thick, woven rug lay across a hardwood floor. A fire was already burning in the hearth. Vivian stood behind him, hands clasped, loosely in front of her. "I thought you might be more comfortable here than in town," she said. "It's quiet. You'd have your own space." Daniel turned his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" She didn't flinch. "Because I don't want to go back to being who I was before that plane. And because I think your daughter is the bravest person I've ever met." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at Maya, who was standing on the porch, examining the bark of an old maple tree, like it held secrets worth learning. "She's been through more than most adults," he murmured. "I can tell," Vivian said softly. He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. "We're not used to this kind of generosity." Vivian nodded. "Neither am I." A silence passed between them, not awkward, simply honest. "You're not obligated to stay," she added. "But if you do, you'd be doing more for me than I could ever explain." That night, the guest house smelled like cedar and soft heat. Maya chose the bedroom facing east. She said she liked waking up with the sun. Daniel didn't argue. He unpacked the few items they'd brought and set her harmonica on the nightstand. After dinner, Vivian had insisted on cooking much. To everyone's surprise, they sat by the fire. Maya sipped hot cider feet tucked beneath her. Vivian poured a glass of wine but barely touched it. Daniel, as always, drank black coffee. Vivian watched them quietly, her fingers running along the rim of her glass. "When you lost your wife and daughter," she began, voice measured, "did it change the way you saw yourself?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Completely. In what way I stopped believing I was meant to do anything useful again." Vivian looked down. I know that feeling. Daniel tilted his head. What happened to you, if you don't mind me asking? She hesitated. The fire crackled. Maya watched her, not pressing, but present. I was told 2 years ago that I wouldn't be able to have children, she said quietly. Not without extreme risk to my health. And even then, it might not work. I'd waited too long, focused on building things that didn't love me back. Daniel didn't move. Maya sat very still. I had a fiancé once, Vivian continued. He left when the diagnosis came. Said he wanted a family. I told him I could build him an empire. But he didn't want an empire. He wanted a baby. Daniel's voice was low. That wasn't your fault. I know that now, she replied. But knowing and believing aren't the same thing. No one spoke for a while. The room was heavy, but not suffocating. Vivian turned to Maya. Do you ever think about your mother? Maya nodded once. Do you miss her? I don't remember her, Maya said. But sometimes I miss the idea of her. Vivian's throat tightened. That one sentence spoken so plainly pierced through more of her than she expected. I think Maya added softly, people don't always leave because they stop loving. Sometimes they leave because they forget how to stay. Vivian blinked quickly. You're very wise for 12. Maya looked down. Only on Tuesdays. Daniel chuckled. Vivian smiled. Not the kind of smile meant for show, but the kind that happens when something softens that hasn't in a long time. The next morning, Vivian invited them to walk the grounds. The early light painted the hills in hues of honey and smoke. Leaves crackled underfoot. A breeze carried the scent of distant apples. This place belonged to my grandfather, she explained, as they walked past a weathered stone bench and a small koi pond. I bought it back from the bank 5 years ago. It was the only place that ever felt real to me. Daniel nodded. Feels lived in. Not staged. Vivian smiled. That's the highest compliment I've had in a decade. They paused near the edge of the woods. A swing hung from an old oak tree, gently swaying in the breeze. Would you consider staying longer? Vivian asked. There's no agenda. No obligations. Just stay. Daniel looked at her, his expression steady. Why, Vivian hesitated. Because I think healing isn't something you do alone. And maybe none of us were meant to find each other. But maybe we did anyway. And that has to mean something. Maya stood a few feet away, watching a squirrel dart along a branch. Daniel followed her gaze, then turned back to Vivian. He didn't say yes. He didn't have to. Vivian found Maya in the garden just after sunrise. The girl sat cross-legged near the edge of the stone path, watching a line of ants move industriously across a moss-covered step. Her harmonica rested in her lap, untouched. A robin fluttered nearby, tilting its head curiously, before flying off toward the trees. Vivian hesitated on the porch, a coffee mug warming her hands. There was something about interrupting Maya that felt wrong, like walking into a cathedral mid-prayer. But Maya looked up and saw her, and she didn't flinch or turn away. Vivian took it as an invitation. She walked slowly down the steps and sat on the edge of the low stone wall, just a few feet away. Morning, she said softly. Maya gave a polite nod. Vivian took a sip of coffee. You always wake up this early? Only when I feel safe, Maya said, her voice quiet but clear. Vivian blinked. She glanced around the garden, roses, lavender peonies, and fading bloom. This place. It was my grandfather's, she said. He was the only person in my family who listened more than he spoke. I used to come here as a child and imagine the flowers were talking to each other. Maya smiled just barely. I like it here, the girl said. The air feels honest. Vivian exhaled a soft laugh caught in her throat. I haven't heard this place described that way before, but it's a good word. Honest. They sat in companionable silence. Vivian looked over at the harmonica. You play. Maya shrugged. A little. Where did you learn? From Dad? Maya said. He taught himself after everything happened. Vivian nodded, understanding without pressing. He fixed it for me. Maya added her fingers, tracing the smooth edge of the instrument. It used to squeak. Vivian tilted her head. Do you ever play for people? Maya looked up at her eyes, deep with a quiet that was not emptiness, but knowing. Only when they're listening. Vivian swallowed. For a moment, the woman who'd closed deals with billionaires felt small in the presence of a child, who carried wisdom like a candle inside her. Later that day, Daniel found Vivian in the library. She was standing near a wall of books, her fingers lightly brushing the spines, without really reading the titles. She looked lost in thought, or maybe just lost. I didn't know people still used libraries, he said from the doorway. She turned, startled. Daniel. Yes. I like the smell. Paper and dust. It's grounding. He smiled faintly. I know what you mean. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. She's extraordinary. He nodded. Yeah, she is. I watched her this morning. She sat still for almost an hour, just watching the world breathe. She does that. Vivian hesitated. Did you teach her that? No, Daniel said, walking in. She taught me. He ran his hand along the edge of a bookshelf. There's a kind of stillness in her, not because she wants it, but because life forced it on her. And instead of breaking, she folded it into something beautiful. Vivian swallowed hard. You speak about her like she saved you. She did. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Some truths didn't need embellishing. That evening, they all had dinner together in the small kitchen of the guest house. Vivian insisted on cooking again. Nothing fancy, just baked chicken and roasted carrots. But it felt personal, like she was learning to offer something without expecting applause. Daniel helped slice the bread. Maya set the table. The radio played soft jazz from the corner. They ate quietly, but not uncomfortably. At one point, Maya looked up and asked, Do you ever miss who you used to be? Vivian put down her fork. Every day, she admitted. But I think I miss who I thought I was supposed to become even more. Maya nodded like she understood. Daniel looked between them, something shifting in his chest. After dinner, Maya played a slow tune on her harmonica by the fire. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. Vivian listened with her eyes closed, her wine untouched on the table beside her. Daniel sat near the hearth, arms draped across his knees, watching both of them. The music filled the space between what had been said and what hadn't. When Maya finished, there was a long pause. Vivian opened her eyes. That was beautiful. Thanks, Maya said. I only play when someone's really listening, Vivian whispered. And in that moment, Daniel saw something in Vivian's face, a flicker of warmth that hadn't been there days ago. Something beginning to thaw. Later that night, Daniel stepped onto the porch alone. The moon cast pale light over the grass. Crickets sang in the distance. Vivian joined him a few minutes later, wrapped in a cardigan holding a second mug of coffee. Peace offering, she said, handing it to him. He accepted it with a nod. You don't need to do that. I know, she said, but I want to. They stood in silence for a while. Then Vivian said, It's strange. I've built a world where I was never lonely, but I was always alone. Daniel took a sip of coffee, then said softly. And now she looked at him. Really looked. Now I'm starting to think, maybe I don't want to be either. Daniel didn't answer, but he didn't step away either. Daniel never liked mirrors, not because he was ashamed of the face that stared back, but because it reminded him of everything he couldn't forget. In the soft yellow light of the guest house bathroom, he stood staring not at his eyes, but through them. The gray had crept in along his temples earlier than it should have. The lines around his mouth were deeper now, cut by grief and long nights. He turned off the tap, splashed cold water over his face, and braced himself against the sink. It had been years since the crash, years since Lily's laughter had echoed from the back seat, since Sarah had leaned over from the passenger side and said, "Slow down, honey, the road's slick." He had slowed down, just not in time. No matter how many times people told him it wasn't his fault, he had been the one driving. Daniel dried his hands and stepped out onto the porch, needing air. The sky was smeared with stars, cool and infinite. The mountains stood dark and ancient in the distance, like they were holding secrets too heavy for the world. The door creaked softly behind him. Vivian stepped out barefoot, her arms wrapped around herself. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said. "You didn't." She came to stand beside him close enough that he could feel the warmth of her without touching. "I saw you at the piano today," she said. "You were staring at it like it had done something wrong." Daniel gave a quiet huff of breath. "It reminds me of my wife. She played jazz. Real smooth, Ella Fitzgerald kind of stuff. After she passed, I couldn't listen to it for months. I'd hear a single note, and he stopped. Swallowed, the world would tilt." Vivian didn't speak. Daniel continued, voice low. "After the accident, I couldn't save anyone. I left the department. I left everything." Vivian looked at him. "But you saved me." He gave a sad smile. "I didn't even want to be on that flight. We were supposed to take the bus, but it broke down outside of Dallas, and Maya said, maybe we're supposed to fly." She said that. He nodded, and when she says something like that, I listen. Vivian folded her arms tighter. "Do you think it was fate? I don't know. What I believe, Daniel admitted. But I know, the second I saw you collapse, I moved like I'd never stopped being a first responder. And I saw Maya move before I did." She didn't hesitate. "I've never seen anything like it." Vivian looked down. "Do you ever feel like you're still punishing yourself?" Daniel turned toward her, then surprised by the bluntness. But she didn't flinch. "Because I do," she added quietly. "Every time I sit in this house, every time I open a bottle of wine and pour it just to feel something, every time I tell myself that love isn't for people like me." Daniel stared at her, and for a moment, he wasn't a man haunted by what he'd lost. He was just a man. Seen. "You're not the only one," he said. Vivian's eyes met his, and there in the dark, something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or mercy. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer. But they didn't walk away. And that, for both of them, was the bravest thing they'd done in years. The next morning, Maya found them both in the garden. Daniel was sipping coffee. Vivian had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and a book resting on her lap. Maya sat on the grass beside them and pulled out her harmonica. "I wrote something," she said. Vivian perked up. A song. Maya shook her head. "A poem. Kind of." She pulled out a folded piece of paper and began to read. "Sometimes the world tilts, but some people tilt with it, and they hold you when you fall. Not because they have to, but because once someone did it for them too." When she finished, neither adult spoke for a long time. Vivian wiped her eyes. "You wrote that?" Maya nodded. "Who taught you how to see the world like that?" Maya looked at Daniel. He did. By staying. Daniel looked down, blinking hard. That afternoon, Daniel found Vivian in the library again. This time, she wasn't browsing. She was sitting in the leather armchair, staring out the window with a sketch pad on her lap. He leaned against the doorframe. "Didn't know you could draw." She smiled faintly. "I can't. But it's not about being good. It's about trying." He nodded slowly. Maya said the same thing about the harmonica once. Vivian looked up. "Do you believe in second chances?" Daniel took a long breath. "I think I do. But I think the hardest part is believing you're worth one." Vivian studied him. "And do you?" "I'm trying," he said. Being here. With you, with Maya, it's the first time in a long while I haven't felt like a ghost. Vivian set her pencil down. You're not a ghost, Daniel. You're a man who stayed when it was easier to run. And that counts for more than you know. He didn't respond, but when he turned to go, he paused in the doorway. I'm not going anywhere, he said, not unless you tell me to. Vivian didn't say a word, but when he was gone, she picked up her pencil again, with hands that were no longer trembling. Maya never told anyone when her birthday was. She didn't like the fuss, didn't like the looks people gave when they realized she had no old photos, no baby footprints in ink, no stories about first words or smashed cake. She didn't know where she was born, didn't know what time. Only that one day a foster mother handed her a folder and said, "You're 12 now." That's something, I guess. It wasn't until Daniel asked for her favorite kind of cake 3 months later that she even realized he'd remembered the date. That had been 2 years ago. And now she was 14. The morning of her birthday, Maya woke up to a folded note tucked beneath her harmonica. Daniel's handwriting rough and clean. Happy birthday, Peanut. The world's better, because you're in it. Breakfast is waiting. Love, Dad. She smiled softly and tucked the note into her Bible where she kept the others. Each one written on plain paper, each one more valuable than anything money could buy. She padded barefoot into the kitchen of the guest house, where the smell of cinnamon and fresh apples drifted in from the stove. Vivian stood at the counter in slippers, an apron over her cashmere sweater, her hair tied up in a bun that looked surprisingly domestic. You bake, Maya asked, surprised. Vivian turned, eyes lighting up. Not well. But I Googled. Maya grinned. Daniel was flipping pancakes. He winked. She only burned the first 2. Vivian lifted her chin. Which I'll have you know is an improvement over the last 5 years. They sat down at the small table, the light from the window spilling in like honey. Vivian had even added a tiny vase with 1 wildflower. There were no balloons, no candles, no streamers, just pancakes, warm apples, and the kind of peace Maya had only ever imagined. When they finished eating, Vivian pushed a small box across the table. Maya hesitated. You didn't have to, I know, Vivian said. But I wanted to. Inside was a soft leather journal, the kind with thick pages and a wraparound strap. On the first page in delicate penmanship was written, "For the stories you haven't told yet." Maya touched the cover reverently. Her voice was soft. Thank you. Daniel handed her a second package, badly wrapped, too much tape, crooked edges. She opened it and gasped. A new harmonica. Engraved on the side in tiny script, Maya Rose Walker. She looked up at him. You remembered my middle name. He nodded. You told me once, half asleep, when you were sick. She blinked fast, holding the harmonica like a treasure. Vivian cleared her throat. There's one more thing. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Vivian reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Maya took it, unfolded it slowly. It was a birth certificate. Or rather, an official declaration of adoption. Finalized, stamped, filed. Her eyes scanned the words. Her name, her birthday, her new legal parent. She looked up, stunned. It's real, Vivian nodded toward Daniel. He filed it 3 weeks ago. Just didn't know how to tell you. Maya stared at her father, eyes glassy. You're really my dad. Daniel reached across the table, took her hand. I always was. She covered her face and cried. Not loud. Not long. But enough. That afternoon, the 3 of them sat on the porch, while Maya played the new harmonica. The notes weren't perfect. That wasn't the point. Vivian watched her with a tenderness she hadn't felt in years. She hadn't just found connection, she'd found a kind of family in the most unexpected shape. She's remarkable, Vivian whispered. Daniel nodded. She teaches me more than I'll ever teach her. Vivian glanced over at him. And you? What's next for you? He hesitated. I don't know. For the first time in years, I'm not planning an escape route. Vivian smiled. That's something. Daniel looked at her. And you? Vivian exhaled slowly. I think I'm starting to believe I could belong to something more than my past. A long silence stretched between them, comfortable warm. Daniel, she said softly. Can I ask you something, Dr? Would you ever consider staying? He didn't answer right away, just looked out across the meadow where Maya's laugh was echoing in the breeze. I'm already here, he said. I just didn't realize it. That evening, after Maya went to bed with her journal clutched to her chest, Vivian stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes. Daniel dried. She glanced at him, suds clinging to her fingers. Thank you, she said. For what? For not running. For giving her this. For giving me this. Daniel folded the dish towel and set it on the counter. You gave it to yourself, Vivian. We just helped you see it. She nodded, blinking quickly. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She reached out and took his hand, briefly, just long enough for the silence between them to become something soft and sacred. The stars that night hung low and heavy over Catskill Ridge, like they too were listening. Vivian sat on the back porch, with her knees drawn up, a soft wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The air was cool, touched by early autumn. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called into the darkness. Crickets answered. Maya stepped out quietly, holding her harmonica. She didn't ask to join, just sat beside Vivian, close enough to share warmth, but not to crowd. For a while they said nothing. Vivian had come to appreciate that about Maya. The girl didn't fill silence with words. She filled it with presence. You ever think about how many people are out there? Vivian asked, suddenly tipping her chin toward the stars. All those little lights, each one probably older than our entire world. Maya looked up. I used to think stars were people who got to stay. Vivian turned. Stay, Maya nodded. Like the ones who didn't leave, the ones who watched over the ones who did. Vivian felt her breath catch. That's beautiful. Maya shrugged. I just didn't want to believe the sky was empty. They sat in that fragile stillness for a few more beats before Maya spoke again. Why did you ask on the plane? Why me? Vivian hesitated. That moment, those seconds between fading and waking, were still fuzzy, like a memory half submerged. But that one phrase had clung to her, like it had come from somewhere deep. She exhaled. Because I didn't think I wanted to live. Maya looked at her gently, not shocked, not judgmental. Why not? Vivian wrapped the blanket tighter. I was tired of being successful and alone, tired of sleeping in a king-sized bed and waking up emptier than when I went to sleep. I'd built a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt hollow. And then I got sick. Not the kind that shows up in X-rays. The kind that whispers, you're done. She looked down. I think, in some way, I boarded that flight ready to disappear. And when I collapsed, part of me thought, maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just didn't wake up. Maya took a moment processing that. Then she asked quietly, do you still feel that way? Vivian turned to her. Not tonight. Maya nodded like that made perfect sense. Can I tell you something? The girl asked. Vivian smiled gently. Please. Maya held up her harmonica. When I was little, I used to pretend this was a key, that if I played it just right, I could unlock a door where my mom was waiting. Vivian blinked hard, and for a long time Maya continued. I thought if I couldn't find that door, then I must be broken. Or maybe I just wasn't worth finding. Vivian placed her hand softly over Maya's. You were worth everything. Maya smiled. Then after a pause, she asked the one question that would live in Vivian's heart for the rest of her life. "Do you want to be somebody's mom again? Even if it's not in the way you planned." Vivian's heart stopped. She looked at the girl beside her, not fragile, not lost, but luminous, like one of those stars. Still here. She swallowed, voice trembling. "I think I'd be honored." Maya didn't say anything else. She just leaned her head against Vivian's shoulder and began to play. Inside the guest house, Daniel watched them from the kitchen window, coffee in hand. He'd heard the harmonica, the notes floating in through the screen like whispers. It was a soft song. New. Made up in the moment. He could see the curve of Maya's head against Vivian's shoulder, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't temporary anymore. This wasn't just refuge or recovery. It was something far rarer. It was home. Later that night, when Maya had gone to bed, Vivian lingered in the kitchen. The lamp above the table cast a warm glow, the kind that made quiet things feel sacred. Daniel entered, setting his empty mug in the sink. "She's asleep?" he asked. Vivian nodded. Out cold. That birthday wore her out. He chuckled. "She won't admit it, but she's never had a real one before." That meant everything to her. Vivian looked down. It meant everything to me, too. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "She told me something earlier," Vivian said. "About you. About how you stayed." He raised an eyebrow. "She talk about me behind my back now. She said she trusts the world a little more because you stayed when you didn't have to." Daniel's face softened. "I think Vivian added, that's what makes you rare. You don't stay because it's easy. You stay because it's right." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why did you stay?" he asked. Vivian smiled. "Because I realized leaving doesn't always mean escaping. Sometimes it just means missing the life you were meant to find." Daniel stepped a little closer. "I keep wondering what would have happened if we'd missed that flight," he said quietly. Vivian's eyes searched his. "Then I might never have known what family could feel like." There was silence between them again, full, not empty. This time, it felt like possibility. Like the sky might not be empty after all. The rain came softly that morning, tapping against the window panes, like a memory trying to get in. Vivian sat at her desk in the study, barefoot hair still damp from the shower, a cup of black tea cooling beside her elbow. In front of her sat an old, leather-bound journal she hadn't touched in years. Its pages were once filled with business strategies, pitch outlines, merger projections. But today they were blank. She picked up the pen and began to write. There are moments that divide a life, before and after. For me, the line was drawn on a plane 37,000 feet above the world I thought I understood. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. He didn't say a word. She didn't notice him until the second page. When she looked up, her expression was somewhere between embarrassed and unguarded. "I didn't mean to eavesdrop," he said, smiling gently. "But it's been a while since I've seen someone look so alive while writing." Vivian closed the journal slowly. "I haven't written like this since college. And even then it was mostly essays about postmodern economics." Daniel stepped inside, taking the chair across from her. What changed? She looked at him, then beyond him toward the window, where rain streaked the glass. "Maya," she said simply. "And you?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. Vivian folded her hands. "You both reminded me what it means to feel something and not run from it. To build something that doesn't require a boardroom or a balance sheet. I think for the first time in decades, I'm writing for myself." Daniel smiled, quiet pride behind his eyes. "What's it about?" Vivian opened the journal again, flipping through a few fresh lines. "It's about a girl who saved a woman's life before the woman realized she wanted to live. It's about a man who forgave the world by becoming someone else's anchor. And it's about how miracles don't always arrive with trumpets, but sometimes in the sound of a harmonica played just off-key. I don't know if it'll become anything she added softer now, but it's pouring out of me like it's been waiting for years. Daniel nodded. Maybe it has. By the end of the week, Vivian had written nearly 80 pages. She wrote in the mornings, often in her robe, hair a mess, eyes still sleepy. She wrote in the afternoons barefoot on the porch, with Maya beside her, both of them wrapped in wool blankets. She even wrote late into the night when the rest of the house had gone quiet, her only companions the sound of crickets and the ticking of the grandfather clock. Maya read excerpts occasionally. She never said much, just listened, nodded, and once placed her hand on Vivian's and whispered, "Keep going." It was all the validation Vivian needed. One evening after dinner, Vivian placed the manuscript on the coffee table and looked at Daniel. "I want to publish it," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised but not opposed. She continued, "Not for fame, not for attention, but because I think there are people out there who need to hear this story. People like me, who forgot they were allowed to feel again." Daniel nodded slowly. "And what will you call it?" Vivian smiled faintly. "The Girl Who Stayed," but Maya shook her head from across the room, where she sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching in her journal. "No," she said. "You stayed too." "So did Dad." Vivian tilted her head. "Then what do you suggest?" Maya looked up, her voice clear and certain. "The Book of Second Chances." Vivian's eyes welled. Daniel reached over and gently touched Maya's shoulder. "That he said sounds just about perfect." Vivian didn't stop with the book. The more she wrote, the more she remembered why she used to believe in impact, not the kind that came with shareholder applause, but the kind that left people changed. So she called her lawyer, then her accountant, then the board of directors of her holding company. 3 days later, she filed paperwork to establish the Maya Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding emergency support, legal aid, and education for children in the foster care system, especially those who, like Maya, had slipped through too many cracks. When she told Maya about it, the girl sat very still, absorbing it. "You're naming it after me," Vivian nodded. "Because your name saved mine." That evening, Daniel found Vivian in the garden trimming the dried roses from their stems. "You're building something again," he said. Vivian didn't look up. "Yes, but this time not for profit, for purpose." He smiled. "Looks good on you." Vivian straightened, brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "You know, for years I thought success meant not needing anyone. That independence was the only way to survive." And now Vivian met his eyes. "Now I think maybe surviving isn't the point. Maybe it's about connecting, about letting someone see the pieces you used to hide." Daniel stepped closer, something unspoken humming in the space between them. "I've seen those pieces, Vivian," he said, "and I like what they're becoming." For a moment, neither of them moved, and then, in the quietest way possible, something shifted. She reached for his hand. He didn't let go. The evening of the launch arrived quietly, as if the day itself understood how sacred it was. A modest crowd had gathered at the town library, a far cry from the towering hotel ballrooms where Vivian Blake once held court. But this place, with its creaky floors and shelves full of forgotten stories, felt right. It was intimate, human, honest. Rows of folding chairs filled with neighbors, former colleagues, foster parents, social workers, and a few quiet strangers who'd read the early buzz about a memoir with an unusual origin story, The Book of Second Chances. Vivian stood near the podium, wearing a navy blue dress, her hair swept back. No jewelry except for a silver chain with a tiny cross, the same one Maya had returned to her on that fateful flight. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She wasn't afraid to speak. Not anymore. But this moment wasn't about power. It was about surrender. She looked down at her notes, then slowly folded them and set them aside. "I didn't plan to say this," she began, voice steady but soft. "But if I've learned anything in the last few months, it's that the most important things we say often come from the heart, not the page." She paused, taking in the faces before her. "For most of my life, I measured success by the numbers on a balance sheet, the length of my resume, the height of the walls I'd built around myself. I told myself I didn't need anyone. And I believed that right up until the moment I collapsed on a flight thousands of feet above the world I'd tried to control. A hush settled over the room. I survived that night because a 12-year-old girl with no reason to trust me put her hands on my chest and told me to breathe. And I did. But more than that, I woke up." She turned slightly, her eyes finding Maya in the second row seated beside Daniel. The girl was dressed, simply holding the same leather journal Vivian had given her on her birthday. That girl Vivian continued voice-catching for a moment taught me that it's never too late to change the story. That pain doesn't get the final word. Not if we decide to speak. There was a pause. A quiet breath passed through the room. And that's why we're here tonight. To celebrate not just a book, but a beginning. The Maya Foundation will be our way of saying you are seen. You are not forgotten. And no matter how lost you feel, there is always someone willing to stay. The room erupted in gentle applause, sincere, warm, sustained. Vivian stepped back, heart pounding, and took her seat. Maya reached for her hand. "You did good," she whispered. Vivian smiled, tears shining. "You helped me say it." Later that evening, the three of them returned to the guest house. The air was crisp, the night sky wide and deep. Daniel started a fire in the outdoor pit, while Maya laid out 3 mugs of warm cider. They sat in a triangle around the flames, wrapped in quilts, and the glow of everything they had built together, quietly, patiently, with open hearts and trembling hands. "I never imagined this," Daniel said, watching the sparks rise. Vivian glanced over. "What, this? A night like this? Us?" Vivian looked at Maya, who was gently tapping her fingers along her journal, the harmonica resting in her lap. "Neither did I," she said. "But I think that's what makes it real." Maya looked up. "I wrote something." Daniel smiled. "Let's hear it." The girl opened her journal and read aloud. "Some people run because it's easier than staying. Some people stay because they've learned how to run through the pain. But the ones who change the world, they sit beside you in silence until you're ready to speak again." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that knew when words had reached their limit. Vivian reached for Daniel's hand. He took it, fingers intertwining naturally like they'd done it 100 times before. Maya leaned her head against Vivian's shoulder, her eyes half closed. "I think this is what a real family feels like," she murmured. Vivian kissed the top of her head. "That's because it is." Inside a copy of the Book of Second Chances sat on the kitchen table, its cover soft under lamplight. On the back flap, the author photo showed Vivian, not in a power suit, but seated barefoot on the porch, Maya by her side, Daniel behind her, with a quiet hand resting on her shoulder. It was the photo the world didn't expect, but the one it needed. A reminder that sometimes the best chapters begin when you think the story is over. Spring returned to Catskill Ridge with soft winds and trees waking from sleep. The cherry blossoms bloomed earlier than usual, scattering pink petals across the porch, like confetti, meant for a celebration no one had planned, but everyone understood. It had been nearly a year since Flight 417, since a stranger stopped breathing, since a girl saved her life, since a man dared to live again. The guest house was now home. The kind of home you didn't need to explain, where silence wasn't awkward, where laughter didn't feel borrowed, and where people remembered how you took your coffee without asking. Vivian sat on the porch swing, watching Maya draw in her sketchbook, one bare foot dangling over the edge. Daniel was in the garden, sleeves rolled up, coaxing life out of the soil, like he'd been doing it his whole life. The sky was that particular shade of morning blue that felt like beginning again. Vivian had stopped counting milestones. The book had been published in 12 languages. The Maya Foundation had funded legal aid for 46 children in under a year. Her boardroom was now a kitchen table, her greatest investment. A girl who played the harmonica in mismatched socks and called her Mama V when no one was listening. Vivian had never been more fulfilled, and she'd never been more afraid of how much she had to lose. That afternoon, the three of them hiked up to the ridge, where the woods thinned and the valley spilled out in rolling green waves. Maya carried a small wooden box, freshly painted, tied shut with twine. Vivian carried a thermos of sweet tea. Daniel brought nothing but his presence, which had long become the one thing no one could do without. They reached the overlook by midday. A breeze moved through the trees like breath. Maya knelt in the grass and set down the box. "It's not a grave," she explained. "It's a memory." She opened the lid. Inside was the original wooden cross, the one she'd given back to Vivian on the plane, resting atop a few folded pages of poetry and a Polaroid of the three of them in front of the guest house, laughing mid-blink. "I wanted to leave this here," Maya said, "not because I'm letting go, but because I want someone else to find it." "Someday." Vivian crouched beside her. "You think someone will?" Maya nodded. "Yes, because I think when people are lost, they always find places like this." Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder. "And maybe they'll understand what it means to be found." That night, they built a fire in the yard. No occasion, no speeches, just warmth and stars, and the sound of Maya playing a quiet, haunting tune on her harmonica. The melody drifted up into the trees, threading itself through the dark, like a lullaby only the sky could carry. Vivian leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her back, slow and certain. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't need to. But as the fire crackled, Vivian turned to him and asked, barely above a whisper, "Do you believe this is forever?" Daniel didn't answer with words. He just pulled her closer, kissed her forehead, and whispered against her hair, "I believe in what we choose to keep showing up for." She smiled, eyes wet, heart full. And just like that, forever felt less like a promise and more like a rhythm, one they'd already begun dancing to, one sunrise at a time. Maya wrote in her journal before bed, "Today wasn't about saving anyone. Today was about remembering we were already saved. Not by a miracle, but by the people who stayed." She placed the journal on her nightstand, beside her harmonica and the framed photo from the book launch. She climbed into bed and pulled the quilt over her shoulders, listening to the hush of the wind outside her window. And for the first time in her life, she didn't fall asleep wondering where she belonged. She knew. The next morning, the sun rose soft and gold over the ridge. Daniel brewed coffee. Vivian watered the garden. Maya came out barefoot, still yawning, and settled onto the porch swing with her journal in one hand and a fresh drawing in the other. They didn't say much. They didn't need to, because some families are not formed by blood or law, but by time, presence, and choice. And some miracles don't arrive in blinding light or thunderous change. They arrive in the form of a second chance, wrapped in silence, held in hands that never let go. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into. It's the one we find when life gives us a second chance, and someone chooses to stay. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. drop a comment below and let us know where in the world are you watching from. It's always a joy to see how far kindness can travel. And if you believe in the quiet power of love, hope, and second chances, consider subscribing so you won't miss the stories still to come. Thank you truly for spending your time with us today. We're honored to have you here. Until next time, take gentle care.